She didn't ask, she demanded. When an HOA Karen tried to hijack my backyard pool for her daughter's wedding, I didn't just say no. I turned 20,000 gallons of water into a jiggling red nightmare. This is how a $3 clearance sale and a petty revenge plot made me the most legendary pool owner on the internet. Spoiler, her guests still showed up. And the groomsman? He belly flopped straight into viral fame. She announced it, clutching a pink clipboard like it was a royal decree. This woman, self-appointed queen of the HOA, walked up my driveway wearing those rhinestone cat-eye sunglasses like a Disney villain who shopped at Kohl's. My daughter's wedding is next Saturday, and we'll be using your pool for the reception. I thought it was a joke, maybe a weird neighborhood prank, but no. Karen was dead serious. According to her, since our homes were part of the same HOA, that meant she had community facilities, which apparently now included my fenced-in, personally maintained, chlorine-balanced, not at all shared backyard pool. Before I could get a word in, she tapped her clipboard, adjusted those ridiculous sunglasses, and said, "I'll be sending my niece to set up some towels and refreshments. Make sure the gate is unlocked." Then she turned around and strutted off like she'd just negotiated world peace. That was the moment I knew I was about to go nuclear with Jell-O. I stood there for a solid 30 seconds, stunned. My golden retriever Max even tilted his head in confusion. Had I just hallucinated that entire interaction? Nope. Karen's heels were still clicking down the pavement like she owned the block. I walked to the side gate and looked at my pool, clean, blue, perfect. It had taken me an entire spring to renovate it. Thousands of dollars, hours of scrubbing, sealing, and testing. And now, out of nowhere, it was apparently the splash pad for a stranger's wedding. I laughed out loud, more of disbelief than humor. My hands shook not from fear, but from pure, unfiltered indignation. Ever had a Karen rewrite reality? Buckle up. She really thought I was just going to roll over and let it happen. She had no idea who she was messing with. I wasn't even anti-wedding. I had nothing against the bride, whoever she was. I didn't even know her name. I just knew she was Karen's daughter, and she was apparently planning on guests diving into my private pool like it was a resort amenity. No one had asked. No invitation had been offered. Just pure entitled expectation. It was like they thought my property was an extension of their Pinterest board. I texted my neighbor Greg, who lived 2 doors down, the one hosting the wedding, and asked if he knew about this. He replied, "Wait, what? Karen said you offered the pool." That confirmed it. She wasn't just entitled, she was lying, too. That night, I sat on my patio chair with a cold drink and a dark plan brewing. I remembered the stack of Jell-O boxes sitting in the back of my pantry. It had been a clearance sale, red cherry, dozens of them. I'd always planned to use them for some wacky backyard event that never happened. But now they had a purpose. The kind of petty, jiggly purpose that felt like the perfect middle finger to Karen's arrogance. I started Googling how much gelatin it would take to fill a 20,000-gallon pool. The answer was both absurd and somehow perfect. I didn't need the whole thing to be solid, just thick enough to ruin any idea of swimming. I would start with the shallow end, let it set overnight, paint a picture of absolute absurdity. 72 hours until Karen's pool party. 200 boxes of Jell-O. Zero regrets. Let's make this stupid. The next morning, I was at the hardware store, stocking up on buckets and industrial cooking pots. The cashier gave me a weird look as I unloaded what must have been over 200 boxes of gelatin onto the belt. I just grinned and said, "Pool party." He laughed. He had no idea. Over the next few days, I worked in secret late at night, early in the morning, whenever Karen wasn't around. I'd boil water, mix in the powder, and pour it into the shallow end, section by section. I even used a giant painter's paddle to stir the mix for maximum coverage. Max watched me from the deck, head cocked in judgment, but I was committed. My hands shook mixing the 50th batch, not from guilt, but from the sugar rush. Max whined like even he knew this was unhinged. But this wasn't just about ruining Karen's plans. It was about standing up to the insanity that had slowly been creeping through our HOA ever since Karen had gotten herself acting president status. By day 4, the entire shallow end looked like a red ocean, shiny, slippery, and utterly useless for swimming. I tested it by dropping a tennis ball onto the surface. It bounced. Victory. I set up cameras, just in case, printed out a laminated sign, caution, experimental dessert cooling in progress, and I waited. The Jell-O was set. The cameras were rolling. And Karen's niece was about to learn why you don't touch my gate. The following morning, just as predicted, Karen's niece showed up. She was maybe 16, dressed in designer clothes and carrying a bag filled with beach towels and plastic flamingo floats. She strolled up to the gate, clearly expecting a party-ready pool. She opened it, walked in, and stopped. Her jaw literally dropped. "What the heck is this?" she said, poking the Jell-O with her foot. "Is this jelly?" She looked around like it might be a prank. I walked out holding a mixing spoon and said, "You're just in time to help with the garnish." She left in a hurry. 15 minutes later, I heard Karen screaming from across the street. It started as a shriek, then evolved into a full-blown monologue of rage. I didn't even flinch. I just sat there, stirring my Jell-O like a villain from a cartoon. She stomped over, red in the face, pointing at my pool as if she were trying to curse it. "You ruined the wedding," she yelled, her rhinestone sunglasses flashing in the sun. "This is vandalism." "Actually," I replied, "this is culinary art. Besides, it's my pool on my land. You made the mistake of assuming otherwise." She didn't know what to say. Her mouth flapped open like a goldfish as her eyes darted between the gate and the blob of red. I added, "Your guests are welcome to grab a spoon. I've got whipped cream too." She let out a strangled noise and stormed off, shouting something about calling the HOA board and filing a complaint. I waved. Max barked. And I went back to stirring the Jell-O, one ladle at a time. Karen thought she could take whatever she wanted just because she wore heels and held a clipboard. But I had something better, a petty plan, a stack of gelatin, and a pool that no one would ever forget. The morning of the wedding was unusually loud. Trucks beeped as they backed into driveways. Folding chairs clattered as they were unloaded. And Karen's shrill voice echoed through the neighborhood like a budget bullhorn. She stood at the center of it all, wrapped in an overly formal pastel suit, barking orders at caterers, florists, and confused-looking relatives. It was like watching a dictator prepare for battle, except the enemy was basic logistics. I sat on my patio sipping coffee, sunglasses on, enjoying every moment of the madness. I had a perfect view of the chaos unraveling next door and of the increasing number of guests beginning to wander curiously toward my fence. By mid-morning, my property had already been invaded, not physically yet, but visually. Guests stared through the slats in my backyard fence like zoo visitors gawking at an exhibit. They pointed. Some even took pictures. I overheard one lady say, "Oh my God, is that Jell-O? That's so cute." I almost spat out my coffee. Cute wasn't exactly the message I had aimed for, but sure, I'd take it. I'd spent 4 nights cooking enough gelatin to immobilize a small child. If they thought it was a whimsical decorative choice, that was just icing on the chaotic cake. Then came Karen's niece again. She had returned, this time with backup. 2 other teens followed her, all armed with towels, a boombox, and a cooler that's flushed with the unmistakable sound of floating cans. They pushed through my side gate like they owned the place, despite the giant laminated sign still hanging there. Caution, Jell-O in progress. No lifeguard on duty. The niece took one look at the now fully set pool and groaned, "Oh, this is still happening." One of the boys poked the gelatin with his flip-flop, made a squelching sound with his mouth, and laughed. I waited a moment, then stepped out with Max by my side. He growled, not viciously, but enough to let them know he wasn't here for nonsense. "You lost?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. The niece stiffened. Karen said we could hang here until the ceremony starts, she said, trying to sound confident. We just need, like, a place to chill. I smiled and gestured toward the wobbling red surface. Plenty of chill here. Though I wouldn't recommend diving in unless you want to bounce off the surface and crack your skull. One of the boys muttered, "Dude, is this edible?" I replied, "Only if you've signed a waiver." That was enough. They left without another word, but not before the niece rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might sprain something. Half an hour later, Karen herself arrived in a full-blown fury. She stomped into my yard like she had diplomatic immunity and started screaming before I even got the gate shut behind her. "You think this is funny? You think ruining someone's wedding day is cute?" I replied calmly, "Nope. I think invading someone's private property without asking is worse." She launched into a tirade about how she'd already told all her guests that they could use my pool, how I was making her look bad, and how this whole thing was going to be reported to the HOA. I asked her if she'd like a spoon. That didn't help. She turned a deep shade of red, almost matching the Jell-O. Karen demanded I drain the pool immediately. I asked her if she knew how long it took to melt 300 gallons of gelatin. 2 to 3 days. If you're lucky, I explained, unless you want to use hair dryers and a flamethrower. She screamed that this wasn't over. I told her it definitely was, at least until dessert. She stormed off again, knocking over a plastic flamingo as she exited. By noon, the wedding was in full swing, and so was the gossip. People walked past my fence, whispering about the jelly pool. A few kids snuck peeks through the gate. At one point, a curious bridesmaid wandered up and asked if she could just touch it. I let her. Reaction: "Oh my God, it's like solid jam." She took a selfie and walked off laughing. I could hear her showing the picture to the other bridesmaids, all of whom burst out laughing and started referring to it as Karen's Kool-Aid disaster. Then something even better happened. One of the groomsmen, already tipsy and wearing sunglasses that screamed midlife crisis, dared another to jump in. $50 if you belly flop, he slurred. I didn't interfere. The daredevil lined up at the edge of the shallow end, counted down, and launched himself into the air like a human cannonball. He ran at that pool like a frat boy charging a buffet. For one glorious second, time froze, toes curled, arms flailing, Jell-O trembling. Then, splat. Not a splash, a splat. The result was legendary. He didn't sink. He bounced. The surface of the Jell-O flexed and wobbled under him like a waterbed from hell. He let out a yelp and slid down into the shallowest end like a human pancake. Everyone lost it. Guests were recording on their phones. Even the bride, watching from the deck next door, burst into laughter. The crowd went silent. Then someone yelled, "Dude, you just got owned by dessert." And Karen? She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. A whole lemon. That was the exact moment Karen emerged from the garage and saw it all. She shrieked like someone had stabbed her cake. She ran over, grabbed the groomsman's arm, and screamed about lawsuits, liability, and gelatin-related brain injuries. The guy just laughed and shouted, "Best wedding ever," before walking off with a wobbly towel draped over his shoulder. Karen turned to me like it was my fault. "You're going to pay for this," she spat. I said, "You're welcome. That man just turned your boring reception into viral gold." I gestured toward the rows of phones filming from every angle. "Smile, you're trending." Minutes later, the videos started spreading. Karen's Jell-O pool, HOA gone wild, and when a wedding meets dessert disaster became the top 3 hashtags in our zip code. The HOA Facebook page was lit up with comments ranging from "Karen strikes again" to "This man is a legend." Someone made a meme of Karen with a spoon photoshopped into her hand and the words "Taste Justice" below it. She didn't come back for the rest of the afternoon. Instead, she retreated into the house, probably to rage-type emails and summon the remaining scraps of her dignity. Meanwhile, the party next door devolved into a mix of awkward dancing, passive-aggressive speeches, and people sneaking off to my fence to laugh at the wobbling Jell-O. I had officially hijacked the vibe of an entire wedding without ever leaving my own backyard. And I wasn't done yet. The best revenge is served cold, and mine was chilling beautifully, one jiggle at a time. By the next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing not just with leftover wedding trash and wilting roses, but with whispers. The videos had spread faster than Karen's gossip chain. Teenagers on bikes circled my street like it was a tourist attraction. Parents came by accidentally on their morning walks, slowing down to peek through the slats of my fence, chuckling under their breath. I even saw old Mr. Donnelly from 3 streets over, leaning on his walker, grinning and muttering. Never thought I'd see the day. Gelatin beat Karen. But not everyone was laughing. That morning, I got a knock on the door from Paul, our HOA president. The man was usually a spineless puppet for Karen, nodding along to her wild demands like a bobblehead. But today, he looked exhausted. He had bags under his eyes, a wrinkled polo shirt, and a clipboard that he didn't even try to hold up with authority. He cleared his throat and said, "Mind if I come in?" I let him. Paul sat on my patio with a deep sigh, looking out at the wobbling red pool like it was a war crime. I waited, arms crossed. He finally said, "Karen called an emergency board meeting this morning. She's trying to file a formal complaint." I raised an eyebrow. For what? Making dessert? He ignored the sarcasm. She says you sabotaged a community event, humiliated her family, and created an unsafe environment. I chuckled. You mean the environment she wasn't invited into, had no permission to use, and publicly claimed was hers? Paul rubbed his temple. Look, I know Karen's intense, but we've got a lot of heat from this. Some of the board members think we need to respond formally before this goes further. I leaned back in my chair and stared at him. So let me get this straight. She trespassed. She lied about having my permission. She tried to turn my property into a wedding resort. And now she wants to punish me for not cooperating. Paul nodded weakly. Yeah, that's about the shape of it. I took a sip of my coffee, smirking. Well, good luck with that. I've got videos, timestamps, and about 1,000 witnesses who saw her niece break in and her guests faceplant into gelatin. Paul sighed again. Look, between you and me, no one on the board really wants to fight this. We're just trying to calm her down. But she's threatening lawsuits, press coverage, even getting her brother, some retired paralegal, involved. I grinned. Let her. I'd love to explain to a judge why I filled my own pool with Jell-O to keep trespassers out. Paul blinked at me. You're not serious. I nodded. Dead serious. I even have the receipts from the grocery store. He paused for a moment, then broke into a laugh. You're the weirdest kind of genius I've ever met. By noon, the HOA Facebook page had officially exploded. Someone uploaded a compilation of all the wedding chaos, from Karen screaming to the groomsman's Jell-O flop, set to circus music. Karen tried to have it taken down, but every time she did, 3 more versions popped up. The comment section turned into a roast session. People dug up old stories like the time she fined someone for having Halloween decorations up on November 1st, or when she tried to ban wind chimes because they were spiritually disruptive. Even the board members were chiming in with passive-aggressive posts. One wrote, "Reminder, private property is not the same as Karen's planning board." That night, my doorbell rang again. I braced myself, half expecting a Karen ambush. But it was someone else entirely. A man and a woman, both in their late 20s, well-dressed and clearly exhausted, stood on my porch. The man introduced himself as Brandon, the groom. The woman, his new bride, offered a tired smile and said, "We just wanted to say thank you." I blinked. For what? She laughed softly. For being the only sane person involved in our wedding. Brandon added, "We had no idea Karen told people they could use your pool. She lied to us, too. We just wanted a small reception with close friends. She turned it into a circus." I invited them in, and we ended up talking for over an hour. They told me how Karen had hijacked the planning from day one, booking vendors without permission, demanding ridiculous flower arrangements, and insisting they invite people they didn't even know. The bride admitted she cried in the bathroom 3 times during her own wedding. But that Jell-O thing, she said, was the only time I actually laughed. Brandon nodded. When Dave belly flopped into the pool, I thought my grandma was going to have a heart attack from laughing. I offered them leftovers and told them they were welcome to the rest of the gelatin if they wanted to start their marriage with a food fight. They declined but left grinning. Before they walked away, the bride turned and said, "Karen's banned from our next wedding." Then she laughed and added, "Just kidding, hopefully, there won't be another one." The next day, Karen went full scorched earth. She started handing out printed flyers door to door, accusing me of weaponizing dessert. She made a scene at the grocery store, demanding they stop selling Jell-O. She even called a local news station, but they never aired the segment. Apparently, they found her story too ridiculous to broadcast. But the best part? When she tried to report me to the city for pool code violations, the inspector who showed up was the same guy who had seen the viral video. He knocked on my door, laughing, and said, I had to see it in person. He walked around, checked the fences, and confirmed everything was up to code. Then he took a picture with the pool and said, "You just made my week." Karen, standing on her porch watching all this, screamed something about corruption and slammed her door so hard the wreath fell off. That week, the HOA board held a private session without Karen. Word got around that several members were planning to vote her out as acting president. Too many complaints, too many meltdowns, too many times her name showed up on angry emails. One of the members even thanked me in passing. "You didn't just protect your pool," she said. "You might have saved the neighborhood." And while Karen was spiraling, I had a new problem. People started asking if they could book my Jell-O pool for events. Someone wanted to shoot a music video. Another guy offered to propose to his girlfriend in it. I turned most of them down, but one teenager offered me $50 to do a cannonball into it for a TikTok challenge. I let him. He slipped, landed on his back, and laughed so hard I had to hose him off. I didn't set out to be the hero. I just wanted my backyard. But sometimes, standing your ground, especially with a little pettiness, can turn you into a legend. It was almost poetic, really. One day, Karen was strutting around like a monarch, ruling over the HOA kingdom, and the next, she was practically invisible. Her usual morning routine of marching past houses and inspecting lawns with that signature judgmental stare had stopped completely. Her social media had gone dark. Her porch light remained off at night. And even the little sign that said HOA business only hanging by her door had mysteriously vanished. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood seemed lighter, happier. The absence of her presence felt like someone had finally taken the batteries out of a fire alarm that had been beeping for years. But just because Karen was quiet didn't mean the fallout was over. The HOA held a private meeting that Friday, and for once, everyone actually showed up. No surprise, word had already spread that her leadership was on the chopping block. I wasn't invited, of course, but the whispers came fast. Apparently, when they presented the videos and statements from multiple neighbors, it was a unanimous vote. Karen had officially been removed from her role. She tried to argue, accused the board of bias, tried to say I had planted the Jell-O to frame her. Yes, she actually said that. But no one was buying it anymore. She was done. A few days after that, Paul knocked on my door again. He didn't bring a clipboard this time, just a sheepish grin and a folded letter. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said. Inside was a formal apology from the board. They admitted they hadn't handled the situation well, that Karen's abuse of authority had gone too far, and that my response, while unorthodox, was understandable under the circumstances. I read the whole thing in silence, then noticed a small voucher stapled to the bottom. Free pool cleaning, courtesy of the HOA. I laughed out loud. "You guys know it's not even dirty, right?" Paul shrugged. Think of it as a peace offering, and maybe a subtle nudge to get rid of the Jell-O. I appreciated the gesture, even if I had no intention of removing the Jell-O just yet. It had become something of a neighborhood legend at this point. Kids came by after school just to look at it. A local artist even asked if she could photograph it for a quirky summer project. I told her yes, but only if she credited it as Karen's legacy. She agreed. But the real surprise came later that week when I got a knock on the back gate. It wasn't another curious neighbor or HOA representative. It was the bride, alone this time. She looked different, happier, more relaxed. She waved awkwardly and said, "Mind if I come in?" I opened the gate. She walked up to the edge of the Jell-O pool, staring into the wobbly red surface like it held answers. Then she sighed. "It's weird," she said. This, this is the only part of my wedding I actually liked. I didn't know what to say at first. She sat down on one of the patio chairs and started talking about how the wedding had been a complete disaster. The music had cut out. The catering had been late. The centerpieces Karen insisted on were too tall and blocked everyone's view. Her husband's grandmother had nearly broken her ankle, slipping on the wet patio tiles. And two of the groomsmen had ended the night in a screaming match over stolen boutonnieres. But the pool, the ridiculous, bright red, jiggling pool that had made everyone laugh, it had broken the tension. It had become the single memory people kept talking about. In a good way. I told her I was glad, and she smiled. "You turned her power move into a punchline," she said. "You know that, right?" I shrugged. I wasn't trying to. I just didn't want people I didn't know swimming in my backyard while I stood there like a lifeguard I didn't apply to be. She laughed a real laugh, then asked if she could do something wild. Before I could answer, she pulled out her phone and said, "Let's take a picture." We both stood in front of the pool, wobbly red background shimmering in the sun. She captioned it, "Best part of the wedding. Long live the Jell-O King." That post blew up again. People who hadn't seen the original video suddenly knew the story. Someone on Reddit shared it with the title, "The Pettiest Pool Owner Ever Strikes Back." I started getting messages from complete strangers offering to send me more gelatin, t-shirts with slogans like "Stay out of my pool," and "Licensed Jell-O operator," even a company that wanted to sponsor a backyard event called Jell-O-Rama. I turned most of them down, but one idea stuck. What if I hosted a small event, just for the neighborhood? A celebration of sorts, not just for me, but for everyone who had been steamrolled by Karen's reign for too long. I spent the next weekend setting it up. I didn't send out formal invites, just taped a handwritten sign on the gate that said, "Saturday, noon. Bring a spoon." By 11:45, people were already showing up. Parents brought kids. Teens brought friends. And old Mr. Donnelly brought lawn chairs for half the block. I served lemonade, played music, and let the kids poke at the Jell-O with plastic forks. Someone brought whipped cream. Someone else brought those tiny cocktail umbrellas and stuck them in the gelatin. It was weird and goofy and perfect. Midway through the gathering, Paul gave a short speech. He stood by the fence with a lemonade in hand and said, "Sometimes the best way to deal with chaos is creativity. And maybe a little sugar." People laughed. Someone clapped. And for a moment, I thought even Karen might have learned something from all this. But then I heard the familiar sound of her voice from across the street. She was standing on her porch, arms folded, glaring at the crowd. She didn't say anything, just stood there watching, fuming. Someone waved at her. She slammed her door, and that was that. Later that evening, as I cleaned up empty cups and folded chairs, I noticed something on the fence. A sticky note. It read, "Thanks for the laughs. We needed it. Your neighbors." And under that, in a different handwriting, someone had added, "P.S. Keep the Jell-O." I grinned, tossed the note in my pocket, and sat down with Max by my side, watching the last rays of sun bounce off the red surface of the pool. Karen might have tried to control the neighborhood, weaponize her clipboard, and turn everyone's lives into her version of perfection. But in the end, she was outmaneuvered by gelatin. And in my book, that's about the most delicious victory you can get. 2 weeks after the wedding disaster, just when I thought the chaos had finally cooled down like a properly chilled Jell-O mold, a manila envelope arrived on my doorstep. It was sealed tight, thick with printed pages, and stamped with the letterhead of some legal office I'd never heard of. Inside was a letter written in the kind of overly formal language that only appears when someone's trying to sound smarter than they are. Karen, apparently, was attempting to sue me. The claim? Emotional distress, property sabotage, public defamation, and something hilariously labeled as non-compliant neighborhood conduct. I actually laughed out loud. I'd heard of people weaponizing the legal system, but this was next level. She had turned pettiness into a paperwork crusade. The documents were clearly drafted by someone related to her, probably that so-called paralegal brother she had bragged about. Most of the arguments were bizarre. One said I had lured guests toward a hazardous environment, as if the red Jell-O had hypnotized them like sirens calling sailors to their doom. Another part claimed that the pool had been a vital visual centerpiece of the wedding and that its gelatinous state had ruined all their photos. The best part? She included screenshots of memes and TikToks as evidence of viral ridicule. My lawyer friend, who I sent the packet to just for fun, replied with, "This is so stupid it might actually collapse in court from embarrassment." Still, I didn't ignore it. I filed a formal response, denied everything, and attached my own photos, receipts, and security footage. I included a copy of the sign I had posted, timestamps of every encounter, and a friendly little note reminding everyone that no one had permission to enter my yard to begin with. The cherry on top? A video of Karen's niece barging into the pool area, proving exactly what I needed. My lawyer friend added a closing paragraph so sharp it could cut glass, something about a clear pattern of willful trespass masked as neighborly entitlement. It felt good, satisfying even, like spooning through a perfect layer of set gelatin. A week later, I got a visit from a city inspector. Apparently, Karen had filed another complaint, this time alleging my pool was a health hazard. When he showed up, clipboard in hand, I was already prepared. I welcomed him in, walked him straight to the pool, and let him examine it. He dipped a test strip into the thick surface, squinted at the result, and chuckled. "Well, it's not exactly a swimming hazard anymore," he said. "More like a really large snack." He looked over the filtration system, confirmed everything was in good working order, and wrote up a short report that simply read, "No violations found. Medium risk for ants." I offered him lemonade before he left. He declined, but asked if he could show the video to his wife, who had been following the drama online. I said, sure. That evening, another round of posts hit the local group chat. Someone snapped a picture of the inspector kneeling by the pool, laughing. The caption read, "When the city's on your side and they are hungry." Karen didn't stand a chance. Her reputation, once bolstered by her aggressive HOA campaigns and perfectly trimmed roses, was now reduced to a community punchline. In the following days, the HOA finalized its new amendments. Paul personally handed me a copy and pointed out the new clauses. One prohibited any unauthorized events that spill into non-HOA land. Another banned using private property as an implied amenity during social functions. And tucked humorously at the end, a new rule labeled informally as the gelatin clause stated, any decorative or culinary alterations to a private pool do not constitute community infringement, provided they are safely contained. I didn't write it. I sure appreciated the nod. Karen, for the most part, went radio silent. Her house lights stayed off more often than not. She stopped attending HOA meetings. Her once weekly email blasts, full of neighborhood critiques, were nowhere to be found. Occasionally, I'd spot her through the blinds, peeking out like a sitcom villain who just got foiled by a banana peel. Meanwhile, I leaned into the fame. I had no choice, really. People kept tagging me in content, asking for Jell-O recipes, requesting permission to recreate the stunt, and even suggesting I launch a line of pool-themed gelatin mixes. I declined the business ideas, but one suggestion stuck. Every year, around the same date, I would throw a party. A quiet, goofy, harmless backyard gathering. Nothing fancy. No DJs. No flamingo floats. Just neighbors, lemonade, snacks, and a fresh batch of Jell-O in the pool. I wouldn't drain it anymore. I'd pour a new layer, a different color every time. Maybe green one year, purple the next. I even installed underwater lights to give it a weird glowing effect after sunset. People loved it. Kids would take pictures. Adults would laugh and shake their heads. It became a tradition. They called it Jigglefest. The following year, something unexpected happened. The bride, yes, the same one returned, not just to visit, but to film something. She had started a small YouTube channel with her husband, mostly comedy and wedding planning fails. They wanted to feature my pool and tell the story from their side. I agreed. The video went viral in less than a week. It was honest, hilarious, and surprisingly heartwarming. The comments were full of people cheering for me, roasting Karen, and begging for more stories. Some even shared their own Karen tales. It was like a virtual support group for the neighborhood round. But the best moment came months later when I saw something small but satisfying. Karen's house had a for sale sign out front. No announcement. No farewell party. No dramatic last-minute speech. Just a quiet, unceremonious retreat. Word had it she was moving to a new development across town, one without an HOA. The irony was delicious. I didn't wave goodbye. I didn't gloat. But I did walk out onto my patio, pour myself a drink, and sit by the pool. The latest batch was lime green this time, shimmering under the setting sun. Max rested beside me, tail wagging, as if he knew we'd finally won. I didn't fill my pool with Jell-O because I hated weddings or because I wanted attention. I did it because someone crossed the line, because they acted like my space was theirs, because they thought consequences didn't apply to clipboards and condescension. But mostly, I did it because sometimes the weirdest solution is the most satisfying one. And in a world full of Karens, a little gelatin justice goes a long way.